Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Well, as President Nixon taught us, even if you're not the person doing the crime, it's the cover-up that winds up getting you. Gosh, I wish I could explain that to hospitals and physicians because they need to know more about it. I've spoken a lot on here about risk management and how hospitals need to address issues quickly, honestly, and directly. But sadly, this does not seem to be the norm. One of the things that is common in healthcare is that your local hospital wants the newest and best equipment for the hospital, irrespective of whether they already have equipment that does the job. So if the hospital across town has a better MRI, then they're going to get one too. It's sort of a keeping up with the Joneses applied to healthcare. Everyone wants the newest and the best, but sometimes newest and best is not always the best. Over the past few years, one of the innovations that has become popular is the use of robotic equipment to perform coronary artery bypass grafts, or CABG procedures. Supposedly it reduces recovery time, but not for one woman at Adena Health in Chillicothe, Ohio. Joan Molly suffered a heart attack at age 72. She had several stents put in a cath procedure, and then, because of the location of several blockages, she was scheduled for heart surgery by one of the hospital's surgeons. The surgeon suggested there be a shorter recovery time if it was done robotically, and Joan agreed. The day of her surgery, her family waited for hours outside the operating room. After 6 hours, the family asked the nurses what was going on. Then, 2 hours later, they were told that there had been a complication. So after they've been there for 8 hours, that's when they find out there's been a complication. One of the robotic pieces of equipment tore the woman's heart, and she was bleeding a lot. Molly's medical records would later show that a few days later they intubated her to address breathing issues. The record revealed that as this was done, her trachea was torn and she needed surgery to save her life. During the procedure to repair her trachea, doctors discovered something else. Her femoral artery had been torn too. She never woke up from that surgery. Now, while tragic, that would be just one of those medical misadventure stories that sometimes happen, if not for the fact that 30 other people who died this year at Adena happened following surgery by one of 3 surgeons at the facility. In perhaps the most shocking of these stories, it's the attempt to cover up one of those deaths by what has to be one of the most ham-handed methods I've ever seen. Let's go to the New York Post story on this episode. So this is from the New York Post, who picked up the story from Ohio. Hospital patient propped up to look fake alive after dying during routine surgery. Doctors at an Ohio hospital propped up a dead patient in a fake alive pose before she was seen by her family, even though she had died during a routine surgery 2 hours earlier. The patient, an unidentified 65-year-old woman, was in good health when she walked into Adena for what should have been routine heart catheterization. The woman's family has claimed discrepancies between hospital records and the death certificate regarding her time of death. While her medical records indicate a 1 p.m. time of death, the woman's death certificate says 3:05, which is the time her family was brought into the room and urged to take her off life support. Well, as you might imagine, if you're being ventilated but don't have any heartbeat, that is not life support, that's just useless ventilation. Her family's demanding the truth. Now, she received surgery from a doctor by the name of Gerard Betts, a cardiologist who's faced previous questions over his credentials. Betts has performed at least 3 transcatheter aortic valve replacement procedures despite not being qualified to perform the specialized operation, the outlet previously reported in May. Betts allegedly cut into an artery during the procedure. While he thought he had gotten the situation under control, the woman was still bleeding later in ICU, and the surgery was then taken over by a second cardiologist, Dr. Raham. The patient later died under his care. At least 31 people have come forward accusing Betts of faking his credentials. An independent autopsy was requested by the family after they found out that Ben Trotter, the Ross County coroner, is an employee of Adena. Well, that would certainly make me question things too. Now, you may not realize it, but doctors get credentialed by the hospital's medical staff committee, and that medical staff committee reviews the paperwork and then decides whether to issue them privileges at the hospital. And if they want to do heart transplants or heart surgery, they have to get specific privileges to do that. Usually what this involves is the documents are painstakingly reviewed, checked and double-checked. You don't take the person's word that they have a medical license, you check with the state. But not always. When a hospital misses things like prior discipline, there is a case of negligent credentialing and a potential lawsuit. From my own experience, I worked with a guy by the name of Mike Swango, who was a doctor who, when I knew him, was working as a paramedic. Now that alone ought to make you consider things might not be as they seem. But he was waiting on his Illinois medical license because he had been kicked out of a residency program at the Ohio State University. And the reason he was kicked out of the residency program at Ohio State University is that he would visit patients and a few minutes later those patients would die, there'd be a cardiac arrest, and he would conveniently be in the area to go in and try and save them. And unfortunately, he couldn't always save them. So they had some suspicions about what he might be doing. They discharged him from the residency program. He came back to Quincy to work as a paramedic until he could get his license in Illinois. And then, because he was such a stand-up guy, he managed to, while we were working at Blessing Hospital, he poisoned the paramedics that were working with him. He used taro ant poison, which has arsenic in it, and he put it into their big pitcher of tea that they kept in their refrigerator in their ready room. He was arrested and convicted and sentenced to prison in Illinois. And then when he got out, he went on to kill patients in New York. And then when he got away with that, he flew off to Africa and he killed patients in Africa. But they were going to treat him rather harshly in Africa. So he jumped on a plane, flew back here, and he was arrested by the FBI at the Chicago airport. But at no point in time did anybody ever actually vet this guy's credentials after he had gotten out of prison. Now, I'm not saying that somebody who was sentenced to prison should never be able to work again as a doctor, because a lot of times it involves something that doesn't really relate to patient safety, like fraud, right? Billing fraud. But in this case, he had been suspected of killing patients, and certainly he poisoned some paramedics, so they had a reason to believe that he probably shouldn't have a medical license. But if you're worried about Mike Swango, don't be. He's sitting in the Florence Supermax prison because the patients that he killed in New York were patients at a VA hospital, and you don't give the VA and the federal government a black eye and walk away from that. So he's going to be well taken care of for probably the next 30 or 40 years.
Hey folks, please excuse the interruption, but let me ask you if you would, if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you would, hit that like button and maybe even leave a comment. That tells YouTube that this is a valuable video and they'll refer it to more people. It helps me out a lot and I appreciate it. Thank you.
But now let's get back to what's going on at Adena. After several weeks of saying, problems? What problems? Adena Health commissioned an independent investigation, and then they fired 2 of the surgeons after they pulled this propping up in bed trick. Now, as odd as it will sound, it's not uncommon for healthcare organizations who think families are medically unsophisticated to hide the actual cause of death. In the case just discussed, the patient was on a mechanical ventilator, and that breathed for the patient, and it would be very hard for the patient and the family to know that the patient had been dead for 2 hours. I suspect the patient already knew it, but it'd be hard for the family to know that. Several years ago, I was investigating a case against a nursing home, and basically what happened is there's this device called a posy vest. And the posy vest is, you wrap it around the patient and you can essentially tie the patient to the bed. Now you don't tie them all the way down so they can't move at all. You tie them so that they can't get out of the bed. They can't throw their legs out of the bed to get out of the bed. And the reason you do that is because a lot of the older people who have dementia have very bad balance. They get up to get out of bed to go to the bathroom. They slip, they fall, they break a hip. And whenever you break a hip at that age, usually the result is death. So they use these posy vests ostensibly for safety. And the posy, if it's applied correctly, keeps that from happening. It's designed to make it easier for the patient to push the call light and get help than to get out of bed. And when patients are well monitored, that's what happens. But unfortunately, that's not always what happens. There are some nursing homes who hire nurses and aides who take care of sick desks, not sick patients. Anything that upsets the natural order of things at the nursing home, meaning that the nurses don't get to sit quietly at their desk and requires them to actually get up and attend patients, is a problem. And in that situation, what you do is you tie that posy vest so the patient basically can't move. And in this case, we were investigating a woman who had dementia. She had this posy vest on, and instead of using the call light, she tried to slink out of the vest by sliding down in the bed. The vest got wrapped around her neck, and sadly enough, she strangled to death. But the nursing home didn't want that revealed because that would be a reportable incident. They'd have to make a report to the state that this had happened. So they called the family and told the family that she'd had a heart attack and would they like to come in and see her. And so when the husband said yes, he'd like to come in and see her, they swore the staff to secrecy, and then they wrapped a towel around this woman's neck to hide the ligature marks. And they told him the towel was there to keep her mouth from falling open, which was ridiculous. She was in rigor at that point. But even in the worst of the worst nursing homes, there are people with a conscience. And the idea of hiding the real cause of death apparently got to one of them. Now, one aide, we never found out who it was, blew the whistle and notified the state of the cover-up. The state came and investigated. They got the coroner involved, and the cause of death went from MI to strangulation. We settled that lawsuit for a lot of money, as we should have. You should never be deceitful with patients. The bottom line, in cases like this, where things go wrong, where arteries get cut, where tracheas get torn, that sort of thing, you admit what happened without admitting negligence, you express your sympathy for their loss, and you void out the bill. You don't play like there isn't a problem. And by the time you've had 30 deaths, it's too late to fire the doctors and suggest you fix the problem. The problem is obviously the process. The medical staff credentialing process is broken, and the quality assurance process in that facility is broken. And it let those patients down. The surgeons may have been the ones who made the error, but the support staff should have caught those errors and done something about them. In the case of the doctor doing the surgery for which he was not credentialed, there should have been only one response: you fire him. But instead, they allowed him to get certification after the fact. What this says is, we value the money from our cardiac surgery program a lot more than we value the patients in that program. That's not a good look, especially after 31 people come forward claiming he falsified his credentials. So, from my point of view, he should be reported to the medical board. He should lose his medical license, or at least get it suspended. The two doctors they did fire, however, certainly earned that honor with their fake death process and bringing the family in while the patient was dead for 2 hours. And what's really interesting is that hospital insiders told the hospital management that the two doctors were seen watching YouTube videos on how to do certain procedures before they attempted to do them on patients at Edina. This is what's been reported in the media. I can't vouch for the truthfulness of that, but that's what's been said. Now, I love YouTube. Recently, I had a light bulb that broke off in the socket. I found out how to get it out of there using YouTube. When my golf cart batteries wouldn't charge, I found a workaround on YouTube. But somehow, I don't think I want my surgeon going to YouTube University to get his surgical training. Call me crazy, but that's what I think. So let me tell you what's going to happen now. First, the hospital is going to get sued for every one of those deaths that occurred on those doctors' cases in at least the last 2 years, or whatever whatever the length of time is on a statute of limitations there. There's going to be discovery. There's going to be depositions. There's going to be people who blow the whistle in those depositions. And we are all going to learn that this hospital had long suspected there was trouble in paradise, but took no action. And the lawyers are certainly going to suggest that that's because the doctors brought in the money. Now, hospitals usually have somebody called a corporate compliance officer. And the corporate compliance officer, his job is to report when the hospital goes off the reservation, when it's doing something it shouldn't be doing, when it's crossing red lines. He is supposed to have a hotline where people can report things like this to him. And my guess is that person's hotline was ringing off the hook. And assuming he took the proper action and reported it up the line, he's probably not in hot water. But look for the board to clean house in the near term. The CEO and the chief operations officer, they're both going to be elevated to the position of private citizen, likely with generous severance packages and a suggestion that loose lips sink ships. At some point down the road, the hospital or its insurer is going to pay a lot of money to these families. Not that that will ease their pain, but it will show some accountability. In the end, assuming they hire people of quality to be the CEO and the COO, the hospital will be better, and it will be safer, and it will take them at least 8 to 10 years to recapture that cardiac market share, because people don't forgive this kind of incompetence easily. So, that said, kindness is something you can do to make the world a better place. If you have the opportunity today, do something nice for someone, even if it's something small. Well, that's what I have for you today. I would love for you to be thoughtful, be kind, and be back here tomorrow at the beach when we can talk about something else. Have a great day, folks.
If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.